I never expected the knock at my door to change everything I thought I knew about him. Before starting the story, please subscribe to my channel and like the video for more stories like these. They say some feelings are born in the quiet, unspoken, unnoticed, and yet louder than any confession. I had never truly understood that until I moved in with my stepfather. I was 20 when I came back to the place that once felt like home. My mother had passed away a few years earlier, and since then, everything had changed. After living in a hostel for college and drifting through cities chasing internships, I found myself emotionally exhausted and in need of something familiar. Someone familiar. My stepfather, Ray, offered me a room in his house again. He had married my mother when I was still in school. A kind man, gentle with his words, always respectful of boundaries. He never tried to be a father figure. He just existed quietly in the background of my life. But in her absence, he had grown quieter, almost like a shadow of the man I remembered. So when I returned, I thought it would be easy, if peaceful, but I wasn't prepared for how much he had changed, or how I would see him now, not as my mother's husband, but as a man who carried grief in his eyes, solitude in his smile, and something else I couldn't name, yet felt drawn to every single day. He welcomed me with a soft smile and helped me settle into my old room. Nothing had changed much, except now the house echoed more. He had stopped playing music. The photographs of my mother still hung in the hallway, untouched. It felt like time had frozen in the corners of every room. In the first few weeks, we barely spoke. He cooked dinner, I did the dishes. We shared polite conversations, safe, surface-level routine. But at night, when I lay awake, I could hear him moving in the kitchen, sometimes sitting by the window, lost in thought. He never talked about her, and I never asked. But there was an emptiness in both of us that kept circling, like a storm waiting for release. One evening, I found him standing in the garden, watching the rain. He didn't hear me at first, so I just stood beside him, listening to the downpour. "It's been 2 years today," he finally said, voice barely audible. "Since she left." I looked at him, his face dimly lit by the porch light, eyes fixed on the sky. "I miss her," I whispered. He nodded slowly, then turned to me. "But you're here now." That line stayed with me. It wasn't just about company. It felt deeper, like I had stepped into a space he had kept closed for too long. From that day on, something shifted. We started having tea together in the evenings. He asked about my dreams, my art, my future. And I asked about his past, his work, the things that made him smile. Slowly, the silence began to break. One night, I showed him my sketchbook. It was full of unfinished pieces, moments captured in pencil, the kind only emotion can create. "This one," he said, pointing to a sketch of a man staring out a window. "He looks like he's waiting for someone." "He is," I said softly, "but he doesn't know who." He glanced at me, holding my gaze for a second too long, and then turned away. The tension was subtle, but unmistakable. I felt it when our hands brushed while passing a plate. I saw it when he looked at me across the table, eyes lingering a little longer than they should. And I heard it in the pauses between our words, where feeling lived louder than sound. I kept telling myself I was imagining it, that it was grief playing tricks, that we were both just lonely. But the heart doesn't lie. One night we sat by the fireplace. It was raining again. He poured us both a little wine just to unwind. We talked for hours, laughing at old memories, letting go of the years we lost. I couldn't stop looking at him, noticing the tired lines in his face, the kindness in his smile, the way his voice softened when he said my name. As the night grew quieter, I asked, "Do you ever feel like you're just pretending to be okay?" He looked at me, a strange look in his eyes. Every single day. Silence fell between us, heavy but comforting. Then he said, "But when I talk to you, I forget I'm pretending." I didn't know how to respond. My chest ached with something warm and terrifying. I stood up, intending to go to bed, but paused at the hallway. "Good night," I whispered. His eyes met mine again. "Sleep well, and thank you for being here." That night I lay awake for hours, not out of guilt, but confusion, because I had never felt so seen, so gently held by words alone. Over the next few days, I noticed we both avoided moments that felt too intense. The conversations remained casual. The glances became briefer, but the weight of what wasn't being said grew heavier. One morning I found a small note tucked under my sketchbook. Some silences are louder than love. It wasn't signed, but I didn't need a name. My hands trembled holding it. Was he saying what I thought he was? Or was I just wanting it to mean something more? That evening, I found him in the study, staring at an old photograph of my mother. He looked lost in thought. "She would have been proud of you," he said, not turning around. I walked closer, unsure of what to say. He finally turned, his voice steady. "I don't want to lose your respect. I've done everything to make sure you feel safe here." "You have," I said softly. He sighed, then looked at me. This time, not with the eyes of a father figure, but a man who had felt too much, held back too long, and finally allowed himself to see someone new. "I don't know what this is," he said, "but I know it's real." My heart beat faster. I didn't speak, but I didn't look away. And in that quiet, the truth settled between us. We were no longer just two people connected by memories. We had become two souls quietly reaching for the same unspoken need. After that night, the air between us was different. Not heavy, not uncomfortable, just charged with things unspoken, questions unanswered, and emotions neither of us were quite ready to name out loud. We carried on with daily life like nothing had changed, but everything had. I noticed the way he'd pause when I entered the room, as if he wanted to say something but couldn't. I'd catch myself watching him from the kitchen doorway, memorizing the curve of his smile when he sipped his morning coffee or the way his hands moved when he read the newspaper. He was calm and composed, always respectful, but behind his eyes, I could sense the same emotional storm I was hiding. One afternoon, I sat in the garden sketching while he trimmed the plants. It was one of those days where the breeze felt like a whisper and even the birds seemed to be speaking softly. "Do you remember the time your mother made us paint this fence together?" he asked, smiled. "She said we were hopeless at it." He chuckled, wiping sweat from his brow. "We left half of it uneven, but she said it looked charming. She always found beauty in the imperfect," I whispered. He nodded slowly. "She'd want you to be happy." I looked at him then, not as the man who once belonged to my mother, but as someone whose kindness had become the calmest part of my storm. I wanted to tell him that being here with him made me feel safer than I had in years, but I didn't. Instead, I kept sketching. That night, I heard the rain return. It tapped gently on the window. Like it had the night everything changed between us. I stood in the living room, staring out, lost in thought. He entered silently and stood beside me. "Do you ever wonder," he began, his voice low, "if we're allowed to feel things others may not understand?" My heart pounded. "Yes," I replied quietly. "Every day." He turned to me, eyes searching mine. "And what do you do with that feeling?" I exhaled shakily. I tried to be brave enough to feel it anyway. For the first time he reached out, slowly, carefully, and touched my hand. The warmth of his palm sent a shiver up my arm. There was no urgency, no rush, just presence, just honesty. We stood that way for what felt like forever, in complete silence, holding hands, holding breath, holding a truth we could no longer hide. "I think about you," he finally said, "more than I should." I didn't look away. "Me too," I whispered. He let go gently and stepped back, as if reminding himself and me that this wasn't just about impulse. It was about something far deeper. Over the following days, we spoke more openly, carefully navigating the space between affection and caution. "I've never known this feeling before," I admitted one morning. "It's terrifying and beautiful." He smiled. "It's been so long since I felt alive. And then you walked back into this house. We never crossed any lines. There were no impulsive gestures, no confessions that would shatter the fragile world we were building. Instead, we allowed the connection to grow quietly, through shared tea, long walks, and the way our eyes would meet across the table and linger just a second too long. One evening, he took out an old wooden box from the attic and placed it in front of me. "I've never shown this to anyone," he said. Inside were letters. Love letters he had written to my mother during their early years. I read them one by one, tears filling my eyes. "She loved deeply," I whispered. "She taught me how," he said. "And you reminded me I still can." It wasn't a replacement. It wasn't about forgetting her. It was about healing, and discovering a new version of love that had grown unexpectedly in the shadows of grief. That night, as we sat on the porch beneath the stars, I leaned my head on his shoulder. "Are we wrong for this?" I asked softly. He wrapped his arm around me, holding me gently. "We're not breaking anything," he said. "We're just rebuilding." And in that moment I realized something powerful. Love isn't always about timing or tradition. Sometimes it's about two souls finding each other in the quietest corners of life, where pain once lived and peace is finally found. As time passed, we allowed ourselves to feel the joy of this bond, quietly, carefully. We didn't make declarations. We made choices every day to be kind, to be present, and to be patient with the heart. We built a life based on understanding, not expectation. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a girl running from the past. I felt like a woman stepping into something real, something ours.